Hello, friend. The mystical American Patriots Society is transmitting to you from beneath 4 million cubic feet of solid granite, in the burning heart of the Yellowstone caldera. This is a variety program for normal sandwich-eating Americans with some concerns about living in a deranged, post-Christian technocracy. So, keep your third eye on the sky and your ear to the ground, as Sumo and Smokestack connect your main brain vein to a higher plane. Are you ready? Stand by.
Sumo, I've got a huge problem.
Well, oh, no. Is it more Jesuits?
No, it's not the Jesuits this time. I don't think they know where my new bunker is. But I was looking at Twitter the other day, and I saw this thing about visualize the apple. And it was this little meme or something. And I realized that this was describing a phenomenon that I do not experience, and that is being able to visualize an image in my brain, like in my mind's eye. No, seriously, this is freaking me out because I always thought that when people talked about, seeing something in your mind's eye, I thought it was, a metaphor, figure of speech. And now I realize that most people can visualize things in their mind, and I can't do it. It's blank in there, bro. And I want to know what happened at the cloning lab that I can't do this, and I am mad.
Well, I know we've been trying to correct that for a while. Can you astral project?
I don't even know what that means.
Oh man, you're missing a lot of faculties.
Well, skip the astral projection. I need some help. We gotta get my mind's eye functional because it sounds really great, and I can't do it.
So here's my hypothesis: is that when Eastern religions were talking about opening your third eye, they actually just meant being able to visualize stuff in your head.
Interesting.
So your third eye is closed.
Okay,
is what you're saying.
Okay.
Because here's the thing, St. Augustine, regarded as a miracle worker, because he could do this magic where people could hand him a piece of paper and he could look at it and not say anything or do anything with his mouth, and then a few minutes later tell you what was on the page.
So at one point, reading in your head was not done, or
it's not common. No, apparently, if you read about this, people would come from miles around. To see this man that could just look at a page and tell you what was on it without speaking it out loud. And, since this aphantasia thing, this not being able to see things in your mind has come around, there was the revelation that a lot of people don't have internal monologues.
No, so they can't hear, they can't make speech in their mind?
Yeah.
Weird.
I don't even know how you operate.
I mean, I can do that.
That, to me, is the strongest evidence for reincarnation, is that we just made too many people and there aren't enough souls to go around. So some people are just bodies walking around empty like zombies. That's the only explanation I can. There's only 4 billion human souls, and they have an extra 3 billion just walking around on complete autopilot. Because I don't understand how you could be alive and function if you can't. I mean, what does that even mean? You can't say words in your head, to yourself. How would? But a lot of people say, "Oh yeah, I don't." When I think there's no language, what?
So how do they read a book?
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. I don't. Are you guys just pretending to get through life? And you're like, "Oh yeah, that book, yeah." This pretending to read that we all do is very interesting. Can you imagine? They just think that we're all just this is some ritual where we look at a page and then pretend to think things are on it or something. I don't know.
Well, that's how I felt about visualizing things in your mind until I realized that some people can actually do it.
Yeah, so my theory is that the consciousness of man is still developing, and that maybe for a while we had only a few people could do internal monologues, and then it became common. Now we're at the transition point where everyone's third eye is opening and we're all able to see images in our head, except for some people like clones and Bantu tribesmen and and dwarves who
dwarves.
cannot see anything either. Yeah.
Okay.
Dwarves
right.
of all races.
Is there
Black
anything that can be done
white
for me?
dwarves,
Is
Chinese
there
dwarves.
how do I open my third eye?
There's lots of techniques. Maybe our audience could help send some messages about how we can get your third eye open so you no longer suffer from aphantasia. Being a clone, I imagine it's going to be a little bit different for you.
Uh-huh.
Of course, some people say that that's the reason they do psychedelics. Because when people describe their psychedelic trips to me, I was always like, that doesn't seem like that crazy. But their mind would be blown, right? And I was thinking, well, maybe that's just because they would there were so many colors and you could see, and it's like, can you not do that anyway? And I understand that it's a stronger stimulus, but still. So maybe you could take some mushrooms.
I don't really want to take any psychedelics.
I know. This is just if you go to the doctor, they list your clinical options.
Okay.
So one option you could do is you could go out to the field where cows poop and look for the tall, thin mushrooms that are brown that have ridged caps. The underneath is what they call gild in the mushroom world, in the world of mycology. You got two basic kinds of caps. I don't know if you know this: gild and ungild. Now the gild have those ridges on the bottom, and the other ones are sort of spongy. Here's the thing. In America, at least, and I'm not a mycologist, so if any of you die taking my advice, it's not my fault. But in America, at least, the spongy ones are almost always not poisonous. In fact, I think always. But the ones with gills, all of the hyperpoisonous ones on the continent have the gills. So you're running a risk.
Okay.
So, and they almost all kill you by liver failure.
Ew. Don't want that.
It's something and your liver can't process it, and then it gets clogged up and you die.
That sounds
terrible. That may be a way. May be a way. Number two, maybe licking a similar thing, licking frogs, like rainforest frogs.
Do they have those in America?
In South America.
Oh.
Which will one day be America.
Okay. Well,
after the show gains prominence. And then or the snake bites can do the same thing if you take small doses of snake venom.
Really? Will make you open your third eye.
Well, yeah, a lot of people have used that for psychedelic purposes in the past. Any kind of venom. Because there's two snake venoms too. There's two. All right, here's the symmetry of the morning. Okay. There are two kinds of mushroom caps, and there are two kinds of snake venom. Okay.
Okay.
Now, the two kinds of snake venom are one, the poison that kills, blood poison, and two, nervous system poison. Take your pick. You ever seen what happens to blood when it gets snake venom in it?
I saw a video. Somebody squirted some in a bowl of blood that turned into jelly.
Turns into jelly. Make sure if a blood poison snake bites you, your blood coagulates in your veins and turns to like a solid.
That's not good.
And then that's not good. You can't live with solid blood. And then number two is it makes your nervous system fire all weird and your heart stops working properly. Because your heart, squeezes like a rag. A lot of people think it just compresses, but it's it's if you imagine wringing out a wet rag.
Kind of twists.
It twists, yeah. And so that's a very complicated motion. And if it doesn't fire correctly, then it gets all this. Your blood stops moving through. Both of them cause the blood to not move through your body, just in different ways.
Well, that's weird. So how does that turn into opening your third eye?
I don't know. That was just an important tangent for all of our society members that are out walking in the woods every day, encountering mushrooms and snakes.
Right. So if a snake bites you, ask the snake, are you a blood poison snake or a nervous system snake?
Yeah.
And then if he talks to you, he's a psychedelic snake.
Which is what happened to Eve, strangely enough.
Yeah.
So those two, and then if you're out in the woods foraging for mushrooms, you don't know anything about mushrooms, but you're starving. Don't choose the ones with the gills, because the other ones may not be edible, but they probably won't be poisonous.
Okay.
So that's just important.
If it doesn't have gills and it tastes good, it's probably
okay. And again, asterisk. It's not my fault if this advice kills you.
Maybe our audience should seek some professional
No, I don't think that's necessary.
I think maybe grab a good book on mushroom gathering before you just go out and start eating.
It's really difficult. I have mushroom books on. The thing about mushrooms is there'll be like 10 species that look almost identical. And it even says that in the book. There's like, even experienced mycologists can't tell the difference between these. And you have to take a spore print and this whole thing. And even that is not. Mushrooming is a work. It's an art form.
It just sounds like a needlessly dangerous hobby.
Like
skydiving.
If you live in some parts of the world, mushrooms are one of the only food sources you can forage. There's not a lot of berries and nuts and stuff.
Oh.
So it's handy, and it's a source of wild protein if you know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But
a lot of good medicine made from mushrooms too.
Yeah, you know how to make a spore print?
No.
Okay, so a spore print's like a fingerprint, and each species of mushroom has a different spore print.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one way to identify it. You cut the cap off, put them on a white piece of paper for like 24 hours, and the spores will fall off in a pattern onto the piece of paper.
That's interesting.
They predictably fall off in these patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Because spores aren't seeds. That's why I'm always distrustful of mushrooms, because they don't have seeds. They're not animals. They're not plants. What the heck are they? Like this whole third class of existence. Like, oh, I'm a fungus. Like, get out of here. Be an animal or a plant. I don't have seeds. I got spores.
Non-conformity will not be tolerated.
I know. Be an animal or a plant. Anyway, so you could do that to open your third eye. You could do an old school baptism.
Okay.
Which is I think this is the roots of modern baptism. Anyway, this is why you cover your mouth and your nose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Someone does it so water doesn't get in.
Mm-hmm.
And they just hold you underwater till you basically drown. And then they pull you back up before you're too far gone, and it's a way of inducing a near-death experience.
That's horrible.
Right. But then that way you can sort of poof and
when you say old school, who did this?
It's theorized the Egyptians did. When you get back into old school, there's just scant bits of paperwork and on a piece of stone. Not even paperwork, just like papyrus work.
Gotcha.
Or stone work,
Okay.
So, but John the Baptist got it from somewhere. He didn't come up with a whole cloth.
Mm-hmm.
He was out there probably with the Egyptians, and they were just smothering people under the water.
Okay.
So you can do that. You can do intense meditation.
Mm-hmm.
To open the third eye, which is really just sit down and try a lot to visualize. Practice makes perfect.
Okay.
I think, can you see things in your dreams?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not totally closed. It's just a little closed. It's just when you're open. Your problem is when your eyes are open, your third eye is closed.
Okay.
It's like when you, it's like making the Vulcan sign with your fingers. Some people can't do it.
Right.
You just gotta work the muscles.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna try real hard. That's gonna be my first. I'm gonna sit in my quiet bunker.
If that doesn't work,
try to see the apple.
I would recommend in these orders. One, try to just try real hard. Mm-hmm. Just concentrate. Two, have someone attempt. I can't come out to the bunker at the moment, but have someone attempt. Maybe another clone to do the intense old school baptism.
Okay.
Of almost drowning you.
Okay.
3, get bitten by a poisonous snake.
Mm-hmm.
4, try a mushroom.
Okay.
You can try other psychedelics too, but that's the most readily available for most people.
Gotcha.
Most people don't know where to get DMT or how to make it, though you can look it up online. And Salvia dilanorum doesn't really grow around here. Plus it's illegal.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So much to think about. It's early.
I'll let you know how my
I'm driving
vision quest
America's
goes.
Wastelands in the Badlands here, parked.
Mm-hmm.
I'm boondocking, what they call boondocking. I've been doing a bit of stealth camping.
So does that mean you're in a Walmart parking lot right now?
Yeah. That's the fancy way of saying I am sleeping in a Walmart parking lot. But that is because I'm on a secret mission, and you don't want it. Like if you pay for a hotel,
They can
You're
track you.
always leaving a trail, even
Yep.
if you pay in cash, because you got to give your name, and they usually ask for a license or something.
Yeah, I've never liked that.
So I just, you just gotta stealth camp
Mm-hmm.
when you're on secret missions.
There you go.
And I'm rendezvousing with many MAPS members at the moment out in North Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
They have a lot going on there. The new telescope is going up rapidly, and we actually I call it an imagiscope.
Mm-hmm.
It's able to view not only into space but into possibility.
Sweet.
Yeah. So it's very busy. A lot to think about. I've got that. I got the mushrooms, the snakes now, third eyes. So a lot going on. But I did find time this week to do some thinking about and reading about chivalry.
Oh, cool.
Chivalry. Have you ever thought about chivalry?
I mean, I open doors for the ladies.
Yeah, that's sort of the most vestigial piece of chivalry that we have left, isn't it?
I guess. I don't really
ahead.
know. I don't really know how to describe chivalry other than be like honorable behavior and deference and kindness towards women and the weak.
Yeah, most people don't. And
Hit me to this, Sumo.
I'm going to hip you to this because here's a problem. Well, as anyone, here's the thing. Those of us who are religiously inclined tend to want to believe that our religion has been sort of the same the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the way that people have looked at their religion has changed pretty radically.
Okay.
And in Christianity, no more evident is this than in the Middle Ages and the idea of chivalry. Because chivalry, I think I've been reading this book. I've had it for a while, but I picked it back up by Maurice Keene, Maurice space Keen. It's called Chivalry, and he probably wrote the definitive book on chivalry. And he defined it as chivalry was an ethos in which martial, aristocratic, and Christian elements were fused together, none being able to be entirely separated from the other. So it was a thought and an ethos and a way of life in which people believed that their path of repentance and their path to heaven was paved through war. And you think like, wow, that's really different than people think today.
Yeah.
But their point was like, look, it requires to do it properly requires everything. You need courage, you need honor, loyalty, you need discipline, you need to fight for the right ideals without going too far. You need self-control. And they're like, so it's like actually being a perfect warrior would of necessity require all of the virtues. Okay. That was sort of the thought process. But it is a very different way of thinking. And I got to thinking, well, how, because I think we've been a little schizophrenic about fighting since World War I, probably. Yeah. And that's because machine guns and stuff. You get into they all went into World War I. World War I is my favorite war because it was the worst war. But it's the most interesting. They went into World War I wearing caps. Isn't that crazy? They went to war wearing cloth caps. Okay. And they end the war with pit helmets and gas mask like that. The 4 years of that war was a complete psychology flip. Wow. They go into the war. You can find the pictures of people going into the war wearing a cap, carrying a pistol on a horse with a lance. No kidding. A lance? Yeah, a lance. Because they thought, well, we'll shoot a little bit, but then at some point we'll have to jump over these trenches with the horse, stab some people. Yeah. Because that's what the last war had been, in Europe, which is largely the Napoleonic Wars. There was a little bit of shooting, and then there was some stabbing. Right. Some shooty stabby. Now, some of the English were actually the most hip to this not going to be the case. The Germans and the French were very caught off guard because the English had paid attention to the American Civil War. And the American Civil War was sort of the earliest, quote unquote, modern war with like Like, they had submarines in the Civil War.
Right.
And grenades and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So things got different. And they realized, the English were like, there's a lot less stabby going on over there. There's still a little bit of stabby, but not a lot of stabby.
Right.
And then, it's some decades later, and like, well, it's probably going to be even less stabby now.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had all these machine guns, and it was just a mess. There was running at them was very not fun.
Right.
And there were mortar shells, which was another thing. And they're like, well, this is really awful. What do we even do?
Mm-hmm.
We're all just sitting here, able to fire this hailstorm of missiles from miles away. And then where was the chivalrous concept was built on the ideas of honor and courage,
mm-hmm.
right? And the Englishmen, I was listening. There's one guy, he died, of course, because he served in World War I, and that was a long time ago. But he was alive long enough to be recorded, on stuff.
Okay.
And he talked about he did 5 tours of duty, I think, on the front lines, and somehow survived, which is just a miracle.
Wow.
Because your chances when you went over the hill was 50-50 death. Mm-hmm. Because you're just running into a spray of machine gun fire with several other hundreds of guys, right?
Right.
Not so. But he said they were like, what were you thinking every time you went over the hill? And he said, every time I went over, I just prayed, God help me be a man.
Wow.
He was very concerned about acting courageously and mm-hmm. chivalrously even. And like the early pilots of World War I considered themselves like the modern knights. The horse was their plane, mm-hmm. even though it's just made of wood and stuff, basically. And they fly around and they shoot at each other, right? And so, but it was like, well, where is the chance for bravery and honor in this new warfare?
Right. Because
what do? You're just everyone, and that still persists today. Like, where's the bravery and honor in like stepping on an IED
or pushing buttons on a drone?
Yeah. It just is like, you like stepping on an IED is just like a dumb accident. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying guys that step on it are dumb. I'm saying it's just sort of like it feels pointless.
Yeah,
it feels pointless. And so all of our warfare since then, we haven't really known how to handle it, even though we still do it a lot. Mm-hmm. But we're schizophrenic about it because the USA has never stopped fighting wars the whole time. But we also feel like, war is bad. All violence is bad. And then it makes this cognitive dissonance.
Right.
So I got to thinking, well, how did Europe used to solve this problem? How did Christians used to solve this problem? And the look into the chivalry idea is very interesting.
So you have to be chivalrous in order to conduct just warfare? Is that kind of the...
I think that would be a fair starting point of a statement.
Okay.
I don't know that would be the whole thing because chivalry is so tied up with aristocracy and nobility. Mm-hmm. It's sort of hard to say that about the modern man who's usually like our wars are fought by peasants, basically.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is something Napoleon started, and I never forgive him. I never forgive Bonaparte for that. Before that, mostly, it may have been citizens fighting like in Greece and Rome. Mm-hmm. But there were a lot of underclass people that they didn't have any political say and they weren't expected to vote. I mean, they weren't expected to go to war. Used to, it was like, yes, there are some of us that do have political power and some of us that are disenfranchised. Mm-hmm. However, those that are disenfranchised are not expected to ever go fight.
Was that standard operating procedure in medieval Europe?
Yeah, the standard operating procedure in medieval Europe.
Well, we owe them a lot of credit for that.
Yeah,
because what are we always saying? What are we always saying here? It's like, well, if we send the politicians to go do the fighting, there'd be a lot less stupid war. Well, medieval Europe actually did that.
Yes, as did the classical era of Greece. Your citizenship depended on your ability to go fight in the war.
Wow.
Now, if you were old and you'd served in war, you could keep having citizenship, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But like if you were, you could be a veteran, okay, and don't have to do it anymore. But
right.
Every voting citizen in Greece was expected, as part of your right to vote, mm-hmm. you had armor, a shield, and a spear, and you were there to go if necessary.
So I guess in America, nobody wants to be a peasant. Nobody wants to consider themselves a peasant, and so they're like, we're all going to get the vote. It's like, okay, but you're also all going to go to war.
Yeah,
But
which is
the
what
ancient
happened.
world acknowledged the fact that maybe some people just want to be peasants or should be peasants. And so, okay, if you don't want to be a peasant, fine, but you're going to have to go to war.
Yeah, and Napoleon broke all this.
Mm-hmm.
Napoleon, because it was the People's Revolution and all that, right?
Uh-huh.
Then immediately follows from that. Immediately follows from that is, well, now you also all go fight, which is why he was so successful. Not because he was such a great general, but just because everyone else was trying to just pull from the nobility class to get soldiers, and he was like, well, I got like a zillion peasants.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not trained or anything, but there's a lot of them. And I'll just give them all a gun and a thing and say, go get them, you know? And it was like, wow, this guy, Napoleon, has a lot of army, right? And we've been doing that ever since. We've been having a civilian, basically peasant army.
Mm-hmm.
And the elite class doesn't go to war at all. It's a complete flip.
Wow.
But in medieval times, if you were to go to war, you didn't necessarily have to be a knight or a noble,
Mm-hmm.
but you were up there.
Right.
Right. You were of the higher castes.
Some kind of
Right,
an aristocrat. Okay.
Yeah, like a farmer tilling his ground for his wheat and his like mud slop
Mm-hmm.
wasn't expected to go to war. In usual, there's always exceptions when you talk about history. The English, most notably,
Right.
because of the longbow. But,
well, the English too. They would have feuds between lords and go kill each other's peasants.
yes.
Right.
So when you go
War of the
kill,
Roses
when
and
you
all that.
begin to go kill each other's peasants, then the peasants of necessity get involved, right? But so anyway, yeah, this idea that this martial virtue as a path to like religious virtue.
Mm-hmm.
I was really thinking about that, and there are basically three texts
Okay.
that we can draw on to understand what they were talking about chivalry. They are unfortunately all have titles in other languages, so I'm going to try and say them and then translate them. So there's the Ordre de Chivalry, which means the Order of Chivalry in French. I'm pretty sure that's what that means. And then there is now that's by an anonymous person. We don't know who wrote that, but it was copied a lot and passed around for several hundred years among the noble class in the vernacular and not the Latin. So we know it was the language of the knights and not the priests.
Gotcha.
So it was popular enough that we can, and copied enough that we assume that it was something the knights liked.
Okay.
We don't know who wrote. The second book is the Book of the Order of Chivalry, which is L'Arbre de l'Ordre de Chevalerie, by who may be Map's patron saint, Raymond Lull, who was a great man. And now he was a Majorcan mystic, which is Matt, you know where Catalan is in Spain?
Yeah.
Okay, it's like there.
Okay. Majorca.
The kingdom of Majorca or Majorca, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Okay, so he was all right. Now I'm going to do an aside. So let's leave chivalry for a second, and then I'll make an aside sound. Yes. Raymond Lull. Okay. Raymond Lull's a guy that no one in the Anglo world has ever heard of.
I've never heard of him.
He's fantastic. Okay. So this is why I say he may be the patron saint of the Mystical American Patriot Society.
Okay.
He was, in no particular order, a philosopher, a mathematician, a knight, a mystic, a holy man, a inventor he was the pioneer of computation theory. His work predated by several centuries modern election theory. He is the first major work of literature in the Catalan language. He was a strong influencer on Leibniz, one of the inventors of calculus. He was a member of the Third Order of St. Francis, and he influenced Guillaume de Bruno, who... All right, let's do an aside about him. This is an aside within an aside. Raymond Lull influenced Guillermo de Bruno, and I can never say that correctly. Forgive me, all of you people who know that language better. This was the guy. He was the first dude to look up at the sky at night, and you can imagine what this felt like for Bruno. He was the first guy to look up at the sky at night and say, "Oh man, those are other suns." That really, he was the first one to dawn on him that the sun was a star like those stars.
Mm-hmm.
And you can imagine, like, you're the first guy to ever have that thought, and your mind just, boom! Ah! Just your head explodes. Like, what? Suddenly the universe becomes this giant thing. Like, ah! And he has an interesting story, and he was eventually killed by the church. But anyway, now that aside's over, and we'll go back to Raymond Lull. So Raymond Lull. Okay, so Raymond's his canonization case for being a saint has been open since the 1500s.
Wow.
They just can't make a decision about him.
Huh.
Even though the Order of St. Francis considers him a martyr because he was stoned to death by Muslims. But sorta. Again, so like none of anything you say about him is always like sorta, and that's why they never made a decision.
Gotcha.
Because he had his finger in like every pie.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now he started life. He was the son of very high-ranking people, and he was basically a tutor to the princes. Okay.
All right.
Like he was his dad. His dad served directly under, who was it? Maybe King James or something. And so he himself was a tutor of James II of Aragon, where it's modern day Sicily. So he was a very upper class dude. He would fight in tournaments. He would fight in jousts. He'd do a show. I don't think he ever went to war, but he went around and he did the knightly stuff. He fought and whatnot. And he was a very worldly man. In 1257, he married Blanca Picane, and they had 2 kids, Dominique and Magalina. But despite that, he was completely unfaithful all the time. He was a troubadour. So he would go around basically getting drunk and writing songs for his lute and going to other courtly noble women and seducing them with his music and song.
Wow.
He in his own words later in his life, he said something to the effect of, "The beauty of women, Lord, has been a constant source of thorn and pain to me," or something like that. Like he was there. Oh, here it is. "The beauty of women, O Lord, has been a plague and tribulation to mine eyes." So he suffered from the lust.
Just couldn't help it.
Just couldn't help it. So anyway, so in 1263, so this is 6-ish years he's been married, right?
Okay. And
cheating on his wife the whole time, and going around rabble rousing, carousing, hitting people over the head with clubs and stuff at tournaments. He is sitting in his bedroom one night by his bed, got his candle on, as you do. He's looking at his 13th century version of an iPad, which is his papyrus, and he's writing. He's been liquoring it up a bit, and he's been writing a sonnet to a woman he's trying to currently woo. Right.
Okay.
He looks up from his paper and he sees a full vision, like right in his face, very realistic vision of Christ on the cross floating in the air beside his bed, life size.
Wow.
He said, "Ah!" And he says he put his paper down. He walked around the house for a minute, came back, it was gone, so he went to sleep. And then he said, "Well, that was weird. I'm going to write more songs for this lady." So he does that some more, and then it happens again. And then he says, "Okay, that was a bit much. But these women are still really beautiful." So then it happens a third time. And then he's like, "Well, now I better listen. But I still have that date with Sophia. So maybe it's just in my head. The vision of Christ appears to him 5 times.
Wow.
And on the 5th time, or maybe the 4th time, I don't quite know the chronology of this, he finally woos this one woman he's been after for ages.
Mm-hmm.
And she comes to him at night. And she strips down. And her breast is just eaten with cancer. Like visibly coming out from the skin.
Like as a vision he's having, or in reality?
In reality.
Okay.
Right. So, and it is repulsive.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because cancer bursting forth from the skin is repulsive.
Yes. This
is no offense to people that have cancer. It's just it's gross looking.
Right.
I think they'd agree. That's why they want it gone.
Mm-hmm.
But so, and then this combined with his vision of Jesus, and then he sees this one. He thinks, even the thing I've been after for so long, what I've been devoting myself to, it's capable of rot and decay, and it's underneath all the beauty is rotten. Right. Wow. That was what he took away from this.
Right.
So then he does something, which is, you think like, okay, now you want to get your life right. What would you do? You go live with your wife now, be happy, and try to stop carousing. That's what most of us would recommend. Mm-hmm. He instead abandons his family.
Oh. You're not making me like this guy. I don't. Huh? You're not making me like this guy yet.
Hold on.
Okay.
He goes and abandons his family. To be fair, so he goes and abandons his family and sells all of his possessions to live like a holy monk hermit.
Okay.
Because he just thinks, I can't be trusted to be in the world at all anymore. He's like, if I stay here, I'm just going to fall into the same sins. Mm-hmm. Okay, so he's doing a radical change. So, and then he goes on this, and he goes and meditates on his visions for a while, and he says, what God is wanting of me is God is asking me to convert all of Islam.
That's good to have goals, you know.
Yeah. So that's what he tries to then do.
Okay.
This was after / during the Reconquista. So the Islam Empire had pushed up and taken over large parts of Spain for a couple hundred years. Mm-hmm. The Reconquista, which means reconquering, the Spanish people had pushed back from the northern Spain and was taking over some of it. So it was a chaotic time. Anyway, he lived in a part that had recently, not too long ago, been taken back from the Muslims. And so there was still some Muslim population there that were enslaved. He bought himself a Muslim slave and said, you got to teach me Arabic. He said, I just bought you to teach me Arabic.
Okay.
And the guy's like, all right, I'll teach you the Arabic. And so then he learns the Arabic, and then he goes around. He's actually he was the first guy to get universities to have foreign language departments.
No way.
Yeah. So he goes around and he gets all the universities like, look, we're gonna be missionaries, and to do that we have to speak their language, and we're not just gonna like conquer them and then like make them do the Christian thing. We're gonna go convince them by reason. Mm-hmm. Right? That was his thing. And people were like, are you sure? And he's like, yeah, it's gonna be great. We're gonna learn Arabic, and we're gonna have a fun time. So he makes all these. He goes all down to North Africa several times trying to convert lots of people. Has some success. Mm-hmm. And while he's doing all this, he's also doing math. I didn't look into the math too much, but some of his theories are still used today. He does this weird thing where he does a lot of theology. He was the first guy actually to come up to use the phrase immaculate conception.
No kidding. Okay.
He's the first guy to use that phrase. Now, whether or not he was the first guy to come up with the idea, I don't know. But he is the first person to use the phrase and to teach it as a doctrine.
Okay.
Even though he's not a priest and has no authority to do this,
right.
He's like, no, this is a doctrine. And everyone's like, is it? Maybe. You know, and and then he also does this weird thing where he you know, he's a bit autistic. He's a mathematician. You can't be a mathematician without being a bit autistic.
Okay.
And he says, you know what, Smokestack, figuring out God's will shouldn't be so convoluted.
Okay.
I think we could make that into a math equation. And so he makes these very beautiful diagrams of like wheels within wheels within wheels within, and like trees as like that have all these crazy computational things that you're supposed to do. They're not that complex when you follow them, but they're complex to come up with.
Okay.
And he was like, and if you follow this, and this was, like I said, he was the pioneer of computation theory, because a lot of this did go into later, like Charles Babbage and his analytical machine, the first analog computer.
Okay.
So a lot of this was, hey, here's how you divine the will of God with math. And so you would start on these points on these compasses he had drawn in these trees, and then you would follow it out through contemplation. You would trace the lines, and I couldn't quite understand how it was supposed to work. I think I could have gotten it if I could speak Catalan.
Okay.
But I was watching these videos of people explain it in this Catalanese or Catanese or however you say it, and I was having trouble following it. I think I sort of got it, but I'm not a Spanish speaker, so and they were just speaking, so he's an interesting guy, and he wrote one of the books on chivalry. Aside over.
That was an epic aside.
Thank you. Oh, wait, one more aside.
Okay.
Let's go back in. The other person, I talked about Bruno, who he influenced. The other person he influenced was Leibniz, the guy that also invented calculus at the same time, independently and concurrently as Isaac Newton. Now, Isaac Newton invented his to explain the motions of the heavens, right? Mm-hmm. So, because some guy, and I love Isaac Newton, don't get me wrong, he was a brilliant man. He used to pull his eyeball out of his head a little bit with a needle and some stuff because he wanted to look at the back of the eye while it was alive and not in a corpse while it moved, because he did a lot of medical treatises too. And so he was very dedicated. Like, that level of dedication is like, well, how does the eye work? I don't know. I'll just pull mine out and see for a second, then pop it back in.
You're kidding me.
No. Isaac Newton was a crazy man, genius. He also wrote more words on the interpretation of the Book of Revelation than he ever did on math or physics. But Isaac Newton. So one time a guy says, "Hey, Isaac Newton, why did the heavens go in ellipses and not spheres, or circles rather?" And he was like, "Good question." And so then he goes away for the weekend. He invents calculus. He comes back and he says, "Here you go." Right. So he invented calculus basically over the weekend. But his method of calculus was for a high and mighty purpose, which was to the order of the heavens. Leibniz, on the other hand, didn't want to get cheated out of beer. And so Leibniz, beer kegs are bulged in the middle.
Right.
And they were like, well, and he was like, how do I know you're giving me the volume I'm paying for? Right? Because how do you calculate the volume with a big bulge in the middle? Like, you can calculate the volume of a cylinder, just the area of the circle times the height.
Right.
He's like, how do I do it with this bulge in the middle? And so then he went home over the weekend and he figured out calculus to do the series of different a changing shape, like the volume of a changing shape. He invented calculus for, so that he wouldn't get cheated out of his beer. And he did that over a weekend too. So,
that's awesome.
Beer or astronomy, take your pick who you want your founder of calculus to be.
Okay. I'm going to go with Leibniz.
Yeah, Leibniz, because he was influenced by Raymond Lull, who's maybe our patron saint.
Okay.
Anyway, aside over.
All right.
Okay. So that was Raymond Lull's work. Remember, it was a while ago, so maybe you don't remember. We had the first anonymous work, The Order de Chivalry, and then we had Raymond Lull's work, The Book of the Order of Chivalry.
Okay.
And then we have the last book, which is our main source, written by the 14th century French knight Geoffrey de Charny. And Geoffrey, the other two, the first guy's anonymous. We don't know who wrote it, what his life was like. The second guy, we know a lot about his life. He didn't fight in wars as far as we can tell, but he was a knight on the side for a while.
Okay.
But Geoffrey lived and died in arms, right? Geoffrey was the knight's knight.
Okay.
He had about 20 years of service and was finally killed in battle. So he presumably knows what he was talking about.
Okay.
All right.
What's his
Now,
book? What's his book called?
Oh, his book is called The Book of Chivalry.
Okay.
Right.
I see a theme here.
Yes, they didn't come up with having like cutesy names for your books is a modern thing.
Okay.
Like the other episode I was talking about, Carl Jung's book about dream interpretation was called On the Interpretation of Dreams.
Right.
It's just you just say what it is, right?
Okay.
All right. So let's talk about the first one first. The Order de Chivalry by the anonymous one. This book outlines it's a short work of poetry.
Mm-hmm.
And it outlines the ritual of becoming a knight. Like the ritual, now you're a knight. You're initiated.
Okay.
That's all it does. But it's presumably followed a lot because it was copied all over the place. So many copies of this. So it takes the form of a narrative of a Christian named Hugh, a Count of Tiberias, was captured in the battle by a Muslim named Saladin. And Saladin, who out of respect for the valor of this knight, says, I'll release you if you fulfill my one request, which is to show me the manner in which knights are made under Christian law. He's curious. He's curious about knighthood.
Okay.
So the alternative is an absurdly high ransom, like that his family have to pay to get him back. So he reluctantly agrees to show him all the proper forms in this story. Okay, so here's how you were made a knight. If you were a knight back in the early 1100s or the 1200s, Smokestack, and or our listener driving a truck, Dave, if you were that guy, this is how it would have happened. First, Hugh dressed Saladin's beard and hair, and then he brought him into a bath. This is a bath of courtesy and bounty, he said, and you should recall to you your baptism as a child, for you must come out of it as clean of sin as you were from as an infant from the font. Then he brought him unto a fair bed, and to signify the repose of paradise, which is what every knight must strive to win by his chivalry. Raising him, he dressed him first in a white robe, signifying the cleanness of the body. Over that he threw a scarlet cloak to remind him of the knight's duty to be ready to shed his own blood at need in defense of God's church. Then he drew on him brown stockings to remind him of the earth in which he must lie in the end and to prepare for death. After that, he bound about Saladin's waist a belt of white, signifying virginity, and that he should hold back the lust in his loins. Then came gold spurs to show that the knight must be swift to follow God's commandments as a pricked charger. Last, he gave him a sword, whose two sharp edges are to remind the new knight that justice and loyalty must go together, and that it is the knight's task to defend the poor from the strong oppressor. So that was the ceremony.
That's cool. I find it interesting that they threw in and defend the poor from the strong oppressor. And
yes.
I wonder how, as a knight, you viewed that in the context of feudalism. How did you view that command?
Yeah, this is. I keep telling people Christianity has been very different over the years. Islam has too, and so has Judaism. They've all changed a lot. That's not to say there aren't constants in there, but like here's an old English hymn. Can you imagine singing this one today? It's not that old. It's like, they would have sung this in the early 20th century. The rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate. The Lord hath made them high and low and ordered their estate.
Yeah,
right.
I think we would sing that at my church.
You would? Yeah. A lot of churches wouldn't.
Sounds
wouldn't. Like, look, you're poor.
Yeah.
You're poor because God made you poor, and you're rich because God made you rich.
Yeah.
And that's like anathema to people today. Like, what do you mean?
Their heads explode.
Yeah. So their ideas would have been very different. All right. So that was the first one. I thought it was interesting that, he's got the two edges. And it's not what we would say today is we say justice and mercy must go together. But they represent the two edges of the sword as justice and loyalty.
Oh.
Right? I don't know. You can explore that difference. Okay. Now, notice also that this is a very secular ritual. I mean, it's a Christian ritual for sure, a lot of Christian elements, but there's no need for there's no priests involved. This doesn't take place in a church.
It's a lay ritual.
It's a lay ritual of a lay order.
Okay.
Right? And they did assume it to be an order. They thought this is like an order, like a monastic order. That's why they had these Knights Templars and these, all these different orders of knights.
Okay.
Now, also outlined in this book at the end is the two things of a knight, the two knightly virtues, that repeat over and over again. That's hardiness and prowess. This comes up the whole time. So hardiness is physical ability and strength, yes, but more than that. It's like if you could do a lot of push-ups or you could bench a lot, they're like, that's fine, but you also need to be able to sleep outside and not complain.
Yeah, okay.
Hardiness, like you need to be able to like endure cold, endure heat, run for a long time, hardiness. Right. It encompasses more than strength and fitness. It is that, but it's more than that.
Gotcha.
And two, prowess is basically skill at war, skill at arms. Like you can shoot your bow and arrow well. You know how to use the sword. And those two things come up over and over again. That's why the man Saladin respected his captor Hugh, because his captive Hugh, because he recognized his prowess. Like this is a man of great prowess. Okay. So that made him like, well, I don't want to kill this man. It would be like killing a work of art.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So, that's the first one. Now, the second one written by Raymond Lull after his cancerous breasts encounter. He wrote one. Now, let's see here. Oh, now his work, as was his life, is a bit rambling. It's a bit here, a bit there, But so his book opens with an origin of the account of the origin of chivalry. It said, quote, "When after the fall of man, war and misprison, I don't know what that means, began to enter the world and to disturb it, chivalry was instituted to restrain and defend people. One man in every 1,000, the most loyal, most strong, and most noble courage, was chosen to be a knight. This man was equipped with a horse, the most noble of beasts, and the best armor that could be had. And he was given a squire to serve him, and the common people were set under him to till the land and sustain him and his beasts. From this beginning," Lull says, "chivalry has endured continually down to his own day, and it is the duty of every knight to train up his son from childhood with a view to discharging those functions for which chivalry was originally instituted. This must not mean simply training in horsemanship and the martial arts. There is more to chivalry than that. Indeed, it is an ethics and science that ought to be written in books, and that are written in books, and there ought to be made schools of instruction in chivalry, just as there are schools in which clerks learn their doctrine."
Cool.
So he has this. They had this idea that it was like, this is how order happens, right? And there's this huge strain in Christianity today of pacifism. Have you encountered this?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But the thing about it is, and they had something right about this, there's no one actually believes in pacifism. If you think about it, because do you want any laws to happen? If so, someone has to enforce those laws. Like, if you say, well, people should pay taxes. Well, what if you don't? Well, then you should you should be arrested. Well, what if you resist arrest? Right? Someone. Yeah. All laws are backed up by force.
Pacifism is pretending you can farm out your responsibilities to other people.
Yes. Yeah. As you know, like
a pacifist can't exist without a warrior.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's like they acknowledged in the chivalry that the warrior class could not be done away with. Like, because the knight was both the warrior to the outside, but he was also the local policeman. Oh. Like that, it was a dual function. So if you're a policeman listening to this, you can take some inspiration from the knight, because if there was a guy in your little area you were in charge of, your duchy, right, who was a murderer, they would be like, hey, there's a murderer, and you'd have to get on your horse and go find him. He's hiding in the woods, and go bring him to justice. Cool. That's what you did when you weren't out fighting wars. That also meant that when they were fighting wars, murderers got to run free a little bit. But so yeah, you can never. It's like, violence is golden, the old phrase. Because that's how everything runs. Like, all society at the bottom runs on a thread of violence.
Yeah, it does.
You can't get, like, there is no such, a pacifist is just someone that hasn't thought about it, really.
Right.
Because, do you want there to be any laws? Do you if you want there to be even one law, someone has to enforce that by force.
But what about the non-aggression principle, man?
I know, it's so dumb. Look, libertarians, the non-aggression. Sometimes it is just to initiate aggression.
Yeah.
Right. Now, not super often, but sometimes.
Yeah.
Violence is not the worst possible thing that can happen. That we need to get that in our heads.
Right.
Because we think like, if violence, and I understand because everyone thinks like, well, what about you have a little bit of violence, you have some more violence, you have some more violence, and then nuclear war.
Well, if you put it into game theory for a second, the non-aggression principle is a game where the winner is the first person to defect.
Yeah. Which is not a good set of rules.
No, it's a terrible set of rules. It's just like
it's a bad rule set.
You gotta betray your opponent before they betray you. That's the non-aggression principle.
Yeah,
and that's the way it plays out.
Yeah, that's why Stefan Molyneux isn't as smart as he thinks he is.
Yeah,
I do like Stefan though, Saint Stefan.
He just needs to get real with the non-aggression principle.
Well, it's trouble. I know that this is going to happen to me. When I turn 50, whatever, I'm going to have some ideas in my head that don't work anymore, but I just grew up thinking them.
Yeah.
I won't be able to let them go. And that's going to be okay. Everyone has to,
I feel like that's hormonal. I'm going to figure this out in my life.
Yeah.
There's a hormonal shift that changes where you're no longer able to let go of ideas that don't work anymore.
Yeah.
And I think it happens like in midlife or late midlife.
Yeah.
And I think it's hormonally driven.
It probably is. Look, everyone
it's the andropause. It's the andropause is real. Yeah. And it affects your ability to change your thinking.
Yeah. Everyone has to become a boomer. It's just the destiny of you will become a boomer at some point if you live long enough.
Right.
You either die a zoomer or live long enough to see yourself become a boomer.
That's it. That's
how it works.
Yeah.
Because the boomers used to be edgy.
Yeah. Yeah,
long
dude.
Ago,
free
but
love.
Now they're just like,
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so then we'll talk about a lesson by Joffrey. Joffrey is, like I said, he was the guy who was a knight his whole life. Okay. So some of the things Joffrey did, Joffrey first saw service in Gascony in 1337. In 1340, he defended Tournai against the English. 1341, he served in Brittany under the heir of France, John Duke of Normandy. 1347, he joined an unsuccessful crusade. We all have those. In 1349, he was the leader of a band of Frenchmen who attempted to recover Calaisis by surprise, but was repulsed by Edward. Another failure. We forgive him. So he was decorated for service in many battles and in foreign battles, domestic battles, and he was finally made to carry. He was granted the honor of carrying the miraculous oriflamme of Saint Denis. Okay, the oriflamme of Saint Denis was the battle standard of the King of France for a long time, and it's a beautiful, very eye-popping standard, like flag on the battle.
Yep. Scarlet
red with like this flaming yellow sun on it with sparks flying off. Okay?
Cool.
And it's called an oriflamme. It was called the oriflamme, but other flag the ends were like jagged.
Okay.
Of the flag. And so after that, any flag that had jagged ends was said to also be an oriflamme. Gotcha. I think to this day. But the original oriflamme was this one. Now, it's the oriflamme of St. Denis because it was originally the flag flown above the monastery of St. Denis, which there was some battle nearby, and they used that instead, and that became a battle standard. For the military, now the oriflamme was raised. While it was raised, it signified that no prisoners were to be taken. Death only.
Yep.
Right? Well, that was up. Now, that was used as an intimidation tactic because a lot of times nobles were wearing very nice armor that was very expensive, and their family had a lot of money. So they could reasonably expect, they might die, but also they might be just taken alive and then ransomed back for money and have their armor taken.
Gotcha.
Right? So that was like, I probably won't be killed. They'll probably just hit me in the head. I'll fall down if this goes sour, and then they'll ransom me back, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when that's up, it's like, no, to the death, everyone. So that takes away your layer of cushion there, okay?
Okay.
While the Oriflamme was up. It was called the St. Denis because by legend it was red because it had been dipped in the blood of the martyr St. Denis, who was the bishop of Paris in the 200s. He was martyred by decapitation, of course. And as the story goes, after being decapitated, he picked up his own head and walked to his gravesite with his own head, continuing to preach repentance to the people.
Awesome.
End of aside. Okay. So he carried the Oriflamme. So he's not a small knight is the point of the Oriflamme. He's carrying like maybe the main flag of the Middle Ages.
Okay.
Right? Maybe like the most recognizable flag standard. He's the guy carrying it. So he writes a book about chivalry. And his books are much more earthy. Like the one was a ritual. Raymond Lull, being Raymond Lull, combined his with spiritual matters.
Mm-hmm.
And Joffrey does not get rid of the spiritual matters, but his is much more down to earth, right?
Right.
It's very much more like, look. One of the points about chivalry is that you got to earn honor through achievement, and his guiding principle is, quote, "He who achieves more is more worthy."
Okay.
Okay, so he very much believed in the sort of knightly adventurous idea of like, look, you go out, you win the tournaments, you do the jousts, you earn honor in battle, and by this you are made more spiritually worthy.
Okay.
Okay. But you also had your motives had to be right for doing this as well as your deeds, right? So earthly renown was of significant value to Sharni. And so was endeavor, for no good man, quote, no good man should rest content on what he has achieved. That is why it's good for a man at arms to be in love with arms, says Joffrey. He will seek even higher renown for the honor that will do his lady. This is a very interesting one. He will seek high renown for the honor it will do his lady. Think what her feelings will be when the man whom she has chosen in her heart enters the room, and she sees all men, knights, lords, and esquires pressing to honor him on account of his accomplishments. She knowing within herself that his love is hers.
Well, that's a pretty cool idea.
It's a very interesting idea. It's sort of like weaponized simping. Like instead of paying this cam girl money, you go out and kill people,
right?
So she'll pay attention to you,
right? But she's only yours though. That's the difference.
That is the difference.
Okay.
But
I don't think it's simping to make your wife proud of you. I don't think that.
I don't either. I'm just struck by how much men do to just impress women.
Yeah, that's the truth.
Every side of the spectrum. It's like wow. That's like there's probably nothing that's ever happened that hasn't been driven by that at some level.
Yeah.
So his view again is very humanly. Like he said, dance and song are good, and he likes to see people in a cheerful spirit. Look, don't be all fussy about all the injuries you receive, because you're gonna get some injuries because you're a knight. And what do? You go on war. And when you're not at war, what do? You exercise constantly by going out hunting and wrestling and doing physical exercises. And there's the interesting woodcuts of them, like doing push-ups and handstands and stuff in a suit of armor.
Whoa!
Right?
Yeah.
So they had very like a gymnastics routine, basically. So don't get upset and don't complain when you're hurt. Be disciplined, but also if good wine is offered, there's no need to refuse it, provided you exercise a modicum of moderation. And now he also includes in this that what you should do is every day, if possible, definitely Sundays, of course, but every day, if possible, you should attend church.
Awesome.
It's a very interesting way of looking at the Christian religion that he's proposing there. And he holds up as the perfect model of knighthood Judas Maccabeus. You know Judas Maccabeus?
Not really.
So in the Apocrypha, well, not really in the Apocrypha, I consider the Apocrypha the books that no one has in the canon.
Okay.
Except the Ethiopians, because the Ethiopian church just threw everything in there in the kitchen sink. So there's nothing. The Ethiopian church has like 1,000 books in the canon. Anyway, but the Catholic Orthodox Bible has First and Second Maccabees, which is the story of Judas Maccabeus.
Okay.
Which that story begins with Alexander the Great coming through, sweeping over Judea. Right. And then he dies and he leaves his princes in charge of the region. And they're trying to force the Jews to be Hellenistic and worship the Greek gods. And a lot of them do. But Judas Maccabeus is there. And Judas Maccabeus' father is he's being forced to go up and offer sacrifice by the Greeks. And at this sacrificial ceremony, Judas Maccabeus' father loses his temper over it. He can't stand anymore. He picks up something. He kills all the Greeks around him, along with his sons. His father's eventually killed, but Judas takes up the place and goes on to win back Jerusalem for a time.
Awesome.
And that's actually historically true. That happened. That's what Hanukkah's about, by the way.
That's what Hanukkah's about?
That's what Hanukkah's about. So a lot of people don't know that. But the Festival of Lights is about the successful repulsion of the Greeks by Judas Maccabeus and friends.
Cool.
Right? And that gets into what is called the cult of the nine worthies. Things get so interesting so quickly. But the medieval knights they had 9 men they considered the 9 worthies. And these were the heights of manhood that could be attained.
Okay.
And the medieval mind loved symmetry, as you know. Just had to have it. So there are 3 sets of 3.
Okay. There's
3 Old Testament heroes, 3 pagan heroes, and 3 New Testament / Christian heroes.
Got it.
And they said these 3 men are exemplars to all men of what you should be. Old Testament, Joshua, conqueror of the Holy Land. King David obviously did some stuff, right? And then Judas Maccabeus.
Okay.
Pagan world, Alexander the Great. Interesting there that Alexander and Judas are both there because they were sort of on opposite ends.
Right.
Julius Caesar. Questionable. Then Hector of Troy.
Okay.
Not Achilles, interestingly, or Odysseus, but Hector of Troy. And that's because Hector, I think everyone agrees when you read the Iliad, Hector acted the most virtuously, even if he didn't win.
Okay. I would have picked Achilles for that, but I'm not really hip to a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, Hector acted more like the motives of the Greeks are questionable in that one, but Hector is just defending his city.
Gotcha.
Right. He's sort of beyond reproach. And then the 3 New Testament / Christian heroes are King Arthur, Charlemagne, who founded the Holy Roman Empire, and Godfrey de Bouillon, who was the conqueror of Jerusalem during the Crusades.
Cool.
So that is that is my spiel on chivalry, and I think we need to look at it for an idea, like, because my thought was, well, okay, how do we bring back like sort of, war with a purpose, or like, how do we make war great again? And by that I mean not this nightmarish hell of bombing people for no reason, killing a lot of civilians, right? Because you can't eschew violence. You'll never get rid of that.
Right.
But how do you do it right? And I thought, well, maybe these old guys had some answers for us on the ways in which we might consider that,
Is it even possible to have honorable war in the age of industrialization and high tech? I
think so. It's going to be more sloppy. There in World War I and World War II, there are definitely stories that invoke a lot of honor, like men that acted very honorably.
Yeah. Well, I'm not talking about necessarily in a single battle, because surely that happens today too.
Right.
Because in a battle, you can sort of throw away all the reasons for being there and just fight honorably and be loyal to your team and show courage and all that stuff. So in that way, yeah, absolutely. I guess the idea of just there's a guy piloting a drone somewhere overhead that's just going to splatter people with bombs, and then go eat a cheeseburger. I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you do that honorably.
Well, this is a question that's been happening since the dawn of machines. I mean, the knights were very. There was a huge debate in chivalry at the time about whether or not they should even have crossbows.
Wow.
Because they were like, this is sort of
It's
cheating,
not even
isn't
fair.
it?
Yeah.
Because a bow and arrow, fine, but a crossbow you could crank and build up a lot of tension, and it could just shoot through anything.
Yeah.
And they're like, is that even fair? Now they're like, okay, you can use crossbows against pagans and infidels and stuff. Okay. But against each other, should we use crossbows?
Right.
And they were like, no, I don't know.
That's just like the non-aggression principle. It's like both sides have to agree, and the first one that pulls out the crossbow wins.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't have an answer, but I think that maybe these guys could provide us a path to thinking about, like, how can we... Because I don't like that our country drone bombs people. I think that's weird.
Yeah, I agree.
And you know, maybe... I don't like that they shelled a bunch of Iraq with depleted uranium shells that cause birth defects later on.
Yeah.
Not if like these sorts of things. Like maybe we just shouldn't do that. Like I don't like that China probably invented a bioweapon it spread on the world.
Yeah.
That's very non-honorable.
No, that is not honorable.
But how do you bring that? And this question, you know, it's not a new question because they were always like, I mean, you know, the knights had this ideal, but then when it came down to practice, a lot of stuff happened. Right. You know, like just read the medieval wars. A lot of stuff happened that wasn't necessarily in line with their ideals. But maybe it's good to have the ideal anyway, right? And not just pretend like, well, there's no ideal. It's all just free range. You know.
Yeah. If you don't even have the idea of the idea,
right, you're
not going to get anywhere.
Yeah. It's also a good way of thinking for Christian people to be like, so maybe this pacifism thing is actually dumb.
Yeah. Well, it takes there's some kind of level of maturity that you have to have in order to espouse an ideal that you can't really live up to right now.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, and I think being like letting go of pacifism because it's stupid and doesn't work, / the non-aggression principle, whatever. Like you have to say, okay, I'm not a brave knight.
Right.
I have no great amounts of either hardiness or prowess, but I'm gonna cop to the fact that they're good, and some people have had them, and those people should be considered of having virtue because of that.
Yeah, you know, I often wonder if that's why there's this big push to not like police these days. Is because there's so many people that like just can't live up to like they look at a policeman and they think like, well, there's a strong dude.
Yeah, strong and
maybe they're
brave.
Just jealous.
Yeah.
Maybe they're just jealous.
No,
I don't know.
That's huge. It's huge because we live in the age of equity, right? And equal outcomes for everybody. And so if anybody demonstrates higher virtue than you got to hate them. Like that is the number one rule of our age.
Yes. Well, did you know virtue means manliness?
Really?
Yeah, virtue comes from the Roman Latin virtus, virtus, which means manliness.
There you go.
So when the original people were talking about virtue, they meant how to behave properly as a man, and then it sort of like got like, well, also, but women can do it too, and
Right.
Yeah, the Romans had this constant battle between virtus and disciplina, because they had this problem also. There's nothing new under the sun. You know, the Roman citizens that had lived in relative luxury, were like, well, they don't really have virtus. They don't have like for that to like win the battles, we need to bring in some of these barbarians who are just gonna like and run out there naked and try to stab somebody. But the barbarians lacked disciplina. They lacked discipline.
Right.
And they couldn't be, they were hard to put in ordered ranks. They didn't build forts. And so they're like, well, we got to have a little bit of virtus and a little bit of disciplina. And so it's nothing new under the sun. But anyway, that's something to think about for everyone out here as I continue my roamings through the Dakotas.
Is it cold out there?
It is super cold. Oh, it is so cold. I have a wood burning stove in my van here. A lot of people don't have that. It's little tiny amounts of wood.
Sweet.
Like wood chips.
Yeah.
And you make a little chimney of aluminum foil that goes up.
Yeah.
Right, and goes out the window.
I guess it didn't take much to heat a van.
No, not much. But you just use some wood chips, and you know what? It's very green.
We've supposed a lot of little ideas that will kill people in this show already.
That's okay. I'm not responsible.
Both the mushrooms and the wood stove in the van.
Look, it's a small stove. You know, it's not a big stove, and it's very important that you make the chimney out of aluminum foil that goes out the crack in the window, because you don't want your thing to be filled with smoke.
There you go.
Right. It's very important.
So Sumo, we're sitting at an hour 15 minutes. Do we do people skills, or do we go to giants, or do we talk about LARPing? We gotta pick one thing to talk about, and then we gotta close the show.
Look, the LARPing was just I was gonna talk about LARPing to start, but then you threw me off with your aphantasia problem.
Oh, okay.
It's okay.
Sorry. It's my fault.
It's okay. No, it's fine.
Fault,
look, you know, the thing is, I got so deep into reading about Raymond Lull that he took up so much of my brain space.
LARPing goes so well with chivalry.
Huh?
LARPing goes so well with chivalry.
Here's my defense of LARPing, which for those of you who don't know, because I know a lot of you are very normal people that have never encountered LARPers. Mm-hmm. And for that, I praise you. Because if you can, LARPing stands for live action role playing. Okay. Which means you dress up like a character from like a movie or a video game or something, and you run around pretending to be them. Mm-hmm. And you jump around. Now that's how it started. You know, like when I was in college, there were these people that would get in the park, out in the woods. And I would go running. Right, I'd go running on the track through the woods. And every so often, I couldn't quite tell what schedule they were on, but there'd be guys out there. You know, one would be dressed in like a Robin Hood costume. One would have a wizard's robe with a pointy hat and a staff. Another one would have like suit of armor made of like linked together paper clips. Okay. Like chainmail, right? Mm-hmm. And stuff. And they'd be out there enacting some weird fantasy battle with foam swords under some weird set of rules that I couldn't quite grok. Like he'd be like lightning bolt, and then the guy would have to fall down. It was very super nerdy. Okay, super nerdy. Yeah. Right. That's how LARPing began. Mm-hmm. But then the LARPers getting defensive of people making fun of them on MySpace or whatever it was at the time. Yeah. They were like, "Oh yeah, well, you know what? Isn't Civil War reenactments just LARPing?" And they were like, it is. It is. Snap, you got us. Yep. You got us." And then, but then people were like, "Wait, don't we LARP all the time?" Like LARPing has come to be like this idea for acting as what you're not. Mm-hmm. Like you're live acting. A lot of people are live action role playing as a rich person, but they're living hand to mouth in debt. Yeah. Right. A lot of LARPing going on. Yeah. But anyway, my defense of LARPing, because there's been a lot of like Ren fairs, Renaissance fairs, and stuff are very popular these days. And that's sort of a LARPy thing. Yeah. You know, all this Game of Thrones stuff, and the fantasy medieval time has never been more popular. Okay. But I defend that by saying that is super trad. Okay. It is trad to LARP. Because in medieval times, they would get together and have fairs where they dressed up like ancient Greeks and Romans. Huh. Toga party. Yeah. They would have a Renaissance. They would basically have a Renaissance era Renaissance fair. And where they got together and were like, weren't things greater back in the olden days? Yeah. They sure were. Things today suck. Let's be cool and call ourselves Romulus today. Okay. You know, there's some guy, no joke, there's some guy in the 1300s who he went about farming and stuff, and then he would look at his lands and he'd go hunting. And then on the weekends, he'd put on a toga and say, "But I'm actually Romulus, the thunder god," and he'd go out to the thing and talk about Zeus. Like, it's just, you know, people have been doing that forever. There's nothing more traditional than pretending that olden times were better and dressing up like them. I can relate. Okay. That's the number one traditional thing to do. Mm-hmm. So, but it serves a societal function, because when your society begins to break down, okay. Culture's like an operating system.
Mm-hmm.
Let's accept that axiom.
Okay.
Culture. So I've got my Windows 10 right here on there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not very good, but it's Windows 10. But let's say I uploaded Windows 11, and it's just crashing. It's just like error, virus. Like, oh no, nothing works. I better downgrade to a previous operating system that was stable.
Yeah.
Culture's like an operating system. It's the way that society goes together. It's like, here's the apps. Like, we have our welfare app, and we have our military industrial complex app, and we have our public education app. And it's like, none of these are working. The apps aren't working. What do? People subconsciously say, well, let's look back in time at other operating systems and see if we can take some pieces and install them now. And that's what LARPing is. Sort of.
So the LARPers are like the torchbearers of the backup system.
Yeah, they're the torchbearers of the previous operating systems. And so I support them. They're like, listen, yeah, we do this stuff, but we used to do it this way. And in theory, we could do it that way again.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never LARPed, but I did briefly for a time do, and I should go back, but I've just been so busy, out here roaming the Badlands. I used to do historical European martial arts, HEMA. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We'd fight with swords and stuff. And that really gave me an insight, like, oh, this is why people used to be so much tougher, because someone's slinging a piece of metal at their face.
Yeah.
And this is really upsetting. Also, everyone should note, swords were not the main weapon of the time. Never were. Swords are a sidearm, like a pistol.
Oh.
Your main weapon is a spear or a lance, because it's so much farther reach.
Right.
And I could successfully fight off 2 to 3 guys if I had a quarterstaff 8 foot long and they had swords.
Sweet.
It's just you have such a reach advantage.
Mm-hmm.
But if you know what you're doing with a quarterstaff, you can hold people back for forever. And if you put a little pointy bit on the end of the quarterstaff, you're in business.
Mm-hmm. So
that's why the English use the quarterstaff.
A quarterstaff with a spear is just a quarterstaff with a blade on the end
right.
of it. Okay.
Right. And a bow and arrow or a quarterstaff is just an unstrung bow.
Oh.
Which is why the English that's why Robin Hood had a bow staff and also because they're the same thing. You just take your string off, because the old strings you didn't want to keep them under tension all the time.
Right.
When you weren't using it, you take it down. Right. Also, it couldn't get wet because they were made of like intestines and stuff.
So you would fight with it. At close range, you would fight with the staff, and if you want to do some ranged battle, you'd put your string on
it up, right,
and fire some arrows. Ha! That's cool.
Still works today. If you have a wooden recurve bow, you can still do the same thing. You can hike through the forest with it, carry your string under your cap, put it on, shoot your deer for dinner. It's a great tool.
Very cool.
It's a great tool. But that's my defense of LARPing. I think you should all go LARP a little more. Mm-hmm. Like, pick your LARPing of what you want to do. Maybe you want to do Revolutionary War reenactments, maybe Civil War reenactments. Maybe you want to make you a log cabin and pretend you're a pioneer churning butter. I don't know. Just pick your thing. Maybe you want to get a wizard's robe and practice making spells.
It's funny, like all the prepper movement's all about the Constitution. But when coronavirus comes through and renders all of our institutions, into nothing, it's not the Constitution that we're going to go back to. It's going to be medieval Europe.
Right.
So really, if you're serious about being a prepper, you should be LARPing and reading the history of the kings of Britain.
Yeah, I personally LARP as an ancient Aztec warrior who I run around with my headdress of feathers, and it's not cultural appropriation, because spiritually I am an Azteca.
Are you sitting on a throne of skulls right now?
Simulated skulls. I've just drawn them onto my van chair here.
Okay.
but yeah, so that was just my defense of LARPing. I don't know. All right, so let's talk about, what was your people skill? Do you want to talk about giants? I have some things about giants.
I don't know that we have time for giants. I think we're going to have to save that for another episode.
Okay, I'll give you a little taste. Okay. And then we'll talk about people skills.
All right, give us a teaser.
Next time we'll talk about giants. Mm-hmm. All right, hold on. Where's my tinfoil hat? All right, I'm putting it on.
Okay.
All right, I'm putting on my tinfoil hat because what I'm about to say, I should preface by saying what I'm going to say next week about Giants is much more reasonable than what I'm about to say now about Giants, which is what I was going to end the Giants bit on today.
Okay.
This is a completely outrageous statement that is almost certainly not true.
Okay.
But in 2002, United States soldiers killed a giant in Kandahar.
Oh, I've heard about this.
A
Okay.
14-foot giant.
I cannot wait to talk about this.
They killed it. They shot it. He came out of a cave with a spear, 6 fingers, 6 toes, a lance. He ran a soldier through with his lance. And then after taking lots of bullets, they finally just aimed at his head and brought him down. He weighed about 1,100 pounds. True story. Now, Chinese drywall. True. Yeah.
Somebody said it was true.
Somebody said it was true. Actually, 2 or 3 people who were actually in the military said it was true.
Wow.
That doesn't mean. Again, I have my tinfoil hat on, recognizing how ridiculous that sounds. But that's our guiding principle here is we're not afraid to be retarded.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, I'm not afraid of that.
I'm not afraid of that either. Okay, so and if you out there have had any experience with giants, write to us and tell us about your giant.
We'd like to hear from you.
If you were in the military and you were part of this raid that killed the giant, that killed one of the former Titans or Nephilim or whatever you want to call them,
right?
Still living somehow in a cave undetected by people. Please write in and tell us. We should drop the
website because we have a website now.
We do have a website now. It's you go ahead and tell them what it is.
It's mapsoc.org, mapsoc.org. And you can go there and fill out any of our unreasonable web forms in order to contact us. All the episodes are posted there as show notes, as well as on your friendly podcasting platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We are live and rocking to go on those platforms. So now we can receive your transmissions. You just reach out to us and touch us.
Yes, we can receive them. And if you have ever encountered a giant of any sort, I'm going to qualify that by saying he has to be at least over 9 foot tall. If you have a friend with gigantism and he's like 8 foot something, or he's an NBA player, I don't care.
That doesn't count.
That's too normal. I want something that's absolutely ludicrous.
Okay, 9 feet and up.
9 feet and up.
Or if you have a suggestion of how I can open my third eye.
Yes.
Not with psychedelics.
I won't accept any stories of anyone over 25 foot tall because that's just straining the letters of credibility.
Right.
If you write in and said, I met a 2,000 foot giant, I'm like, no, you didn't.
Okay, so between 9'0" and 25 foot 11.
11. Yeah. That's what I will accept as possible truth.
Okay.
But that's only because I'm in the Dakotas right now, and the Dakotas make you feel a little strange. All right, go ahead. What we're going to talk about people skills.
What would you say you do here? I have people skills.
We have people skills.
Our people skill today is philosophical biowarfare.
Ooh.
Otherwise known as baking. Okay? Baking. Specifically making bread that is fermented. Okay? We might do a series on using bacteria to one's advantage. But I want to start with bread making. And I've been making bread on and off for a long time. And it's a very cool experience. Now, I know there's a lot of you out there who are like, oh, I can't eat gluten. I have gluten sensitivity. You know what? You probably don't.
No, you don't.
You probably don't have gluten sensitivity. I know celiacs is a thing. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people that are gluten sensitive. A lot of these people are just feel bad when they eat terrible fake bread.
Myotoxins.
What?
Myotoxins. A lot of the wheat in America is kept in barns for months.
Yep.
And it gets a little bit of mold and fungus on it. And then that goes into your bread and that makes you feel bad. If you make it yourself fresh, it's a totally different experience.
Oh, man. Absolutely.
Totally different.
It is. And so you can do this as part of using the biological world that is all around you to your advantage over the technocrat. So the technocrat lives in his megacity apartment. He sterilizes his environment. All his food is highly processed to where it was maybe at some point in the food chain, it got rotten, maybe it got pooped on, but it's okay because we're going to process it. We're going to render it almost valueless of nutrition, but also sterile. And then that's what the technocrat lives on, okay? The human being, on the other hand, which you, my audience member, are,
Yes.
are going to embrace the biome around you. You're surrounded by yeast everywhere. There's yeast crawling on your face right now. In your thick beard, you have yeast that you can use to make beer.
Yes.
Okay?
All you do is you put your beard in the liquid.
Yep.
And that's how it happens.
Yeah. Seriously, you can legit make beer that way.
You can.
So,
hey, if you were talking about processed food,
yeah.
You ever had chili from a gas station?
No.
Think about that for a minute. Like once there was a cow in a field.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine all the steps that had to be happening for that cow to be pumped through a tube into a cup of chili.
Gas station chili comes out of a tube.
There's a pump. It's like a ketchup pump, for like a, and you pump it. They give you a cup and then you pump it and this chili comes out of like this ketchup tube.
This is too much.
And it's warm. It's like in a heater, so it's warm. It's just been sitting there warm for ages, and some cow, who is a solid creature, has been turned into this pump chili.
Is this what happens at Wendy's?
I think so. It's like, it's just you go and you pump the mustard. There's an identical thing for chili. Truckers probably do.
I'm dying. Truckers, if you eat gas station chili on a regular basis, send us a note and tell us how it is.
I went through a phase where I pretty much only ate what was out of gas station hot boxes for like a month or two. It wasn't a good phase.
That sounds like a bad phase. Okay, let's get this thing back on track here. Okay. If you're gonna make bread, all you're doing is you're taking the bacteria that's all around you in the world and putting it on some wet, ground up wheat or whatever grades you want to use, and that bacteria is gonna do its magic. And the difference,
yeast isn't bacteria though.
Oh, it's a fungus. I know.
But I'm just saying that ties in with our mushrooms from earlier. It's all planned.
It's all okay. Yeah, it's true.
It's tiny mushrooms. It's very tiny mushrooms.
It's sort of a bacteria and sort of a fungus. It's a complicated organism.
I prefer to think of it as very tiny mushrooms.
Okay, so the tiny mushrooms will go to work, but they do important things to the flour that aren't done in industrial baking. Okay, so I want the word industrial to become a pejorative. In our minds. Word. I'm just gonna. That's the tiniest aside of the show. Industrial is now a pejorative. Okay, so if you buy bread at the grocery store, the wheat has been sitting in a barn for ages. It's covered in harmful, not the good yeast, but like bad, weird mycobacteria. Okay, or myco yeast, and it's toxified. And then they grind it up, and they soak it in water and knead it. But yeast is like actual bread making yeast. Is never applied to this stuff and allowed to do its good work in partially digesting and modifying all the parts of the wheat in order to make it more nutritious and digestible. You're basically, it's like eating raw celery all the time. It's like there's some stuff there, but you're not going to take full advantage of it, and it's going to be hard on your body. Okay? And there's a lot of things that just do better when they're cooked. We cook our food to make it easier to digest and more pleasant to eat and all the easier on the guts. Okay? Think of the fermentation of bread and beer and cheese. We're taking something and improving it using bacteria. And so when you do that to your bread, you actually make bread with yeast, and the idea that it's going to rise because of the gases produced as part of the fermentation process instead of just sprinkling baking powder in it, which is what happens at an industrial bakery. You get all these health benefits, and suddenly, depending on what sort of wheat you're using and how fresh it is, your guts are going to be a lot better off if you make your own bread in that way. So I'm not going to go really through the process because you're a lot better off just looking in some books, but I will recommend the work of Peter Reinhardt if you really want to get into some very cool bread making techniques. he's got this whole method that he's come up with that makes some really good bread. And he's going to use you're grinding your own flour out of whole wheat berries, and you're making real hearty whole wheat bread. If you want to do something a little more conventional, I'd recommend the America's Test Kitchen Family Baking Book, specifically the section talking about rustic breads. There's some great, you can just make a big wad of dough and leave it to rise and then throw it in the oven, and it comes out beautiful and delicious and moist. And I'll add a bonus tip for the bread makers. Make your bread in a Dutch oven, a big cast iron Dutch oven. Stick that in the oven. That keeps all the moisture in, and the crust doesn't harden until the very last bit of the baking, and the inside of the bread is just so moist and delicious. It's incredible.
Now, does this apply to lambic also?
I've never made lambic.
I think lambic is you make beer, but you don't add yeast to it. You just take the yeast, you let the yeast fall into it from the atmosphere.
Right, and I think lambic has a lot of fruit in it, right? So it's very high sugar content.
Oh yeah, probably. Yeah.
So if you were to take grape juice or apple juice or whatever, I mean, this is how we got wine, right? And you just stick it in a barrel, it's gonna ferment. The sugar content is so high, the original fruit is covered in yeast already when you juice it. It's basically you can't have grape juice. Grape juice didn't exist until before refrigeration and pasteurization.
Yeah.
Because juices that you buy at the store are pasteurized, so they won't turn into wine, which is just a shame. But before that, that's why when a Baptist tells me that they were drinking grape juice, I laugh. It's like, you don't know anything about chemistry.
Impossible.
It's impossible because it turns to wine like day one. It starts turning into wine.
Yeah.
Anyway, what was your question about lambic? Yeah, so the sugar content is so high, you just can't. It just happens. With beer and things, you have to goose it a little bit to get it to do what you want it to do. Yeah, because it's not quite as much sugar.
Pasteurization. Louis Pasteur, the guy that invented that, he's an interesting character. He might be worth a show.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy.
All right.
I had this book named Pasteur's Quadrant where he was talking about his philosophy of science. I have to find it. It's somewhere in the van.
All right. Well, I'll look forward to that on a future show.
Yeah, so I think we gave everyone a lot to think about today. They got to make bread and they got to LARP.
Yep.
Hey, those could go perfect together.
Yeah.
You dress up in a bonnet, like you're a pioneer woman,
right?
And you go and you bake your bread.
Well, not if we're really LARPing here. Not everybody can be at night. It's only 1 in 1,000 people or whatever.
Right.
So the rest of the people have to be peasants, and peasants made bread every day.
Well, Raymond Lowell had a very exclusionary knighthood.
Okay.
But Joffrey was more like, but also in Joffrey's time, there was more need for a larger army, so they expanded it a bit, you know, and so he'd expanded his likewise to knights, but also just men at arms.
Okay.
But yeah, you can be look if you're out there, I want to encourage all of our listeners to dress like pioneer women, be male or female.
Okay.
And to bake your bread as part of your LARPing. Or, you don't have to dress like a woman. That's not a requirement for Matt.
We did not just tell anybody to go around and drag.
Yeah.
Not our thing.
Hamburger, bang, bang.
How dare you?
Where was the